Okay, so we're almost wrapped up with our Ionic app. Now what I'd like to do is just to make some aesthetic changes as well as the ability to select a note and then get taken to a note detail page, if you will. So let's go ahead and get the functionality of the note detail page worked out first, and then we'll worry about making the app look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the server. If it's still running for you, just go ahead and stop it. And what we're going to do is Ionic generate page view-note. So you can see the OK response here, and then it generated this new page for us. Let's go ahead and take a look. We can see it under our pages. We have this view note directory, which contains our template and our component as well as our SCSS file. Let's go ahead and hammer out the template since it should be pretty straightforward. And go ahead and, as usual, remove the boilerplate code. And in our Ion content, I'm going to use an Ion card element here. And the Ion card will have Ion card content. This is just a nice component that Ionic provides for us to display some data. And here we'll have Ion card title. This is going to give us a sort of material design type card component to work with. And here we're going to have access to a note object in this view. So let's go ahead and grab the title property off of that note object. And then maybe just below it we'll have a div with class note date. And we will grab the date. Just using interpolation here again. Alright, then I'm just going to keep things kind of simple. We're going to have a separator there, and then we'll have a div that just contains the note content. Okay, that's all good. And then maybe at the bottom of our view here, we can have an Ion footer. This is going to put a sort of div, if you will, at the very bottom of our view. And in here we'll have a button, Ion button. And with Ionic we can specify a color, and danger will make it a sort of red color. We'll make it block, which will make the button spread across the entire bottom of our view, and we'll have a click event here to actually delete a note. So we want the ability to delete notes as well as to create them. And what we're going to do is pass our unique identifier in the form of create date here to a click event. So we'll just go ahead and bind that delete note method to a click event on this button, and then we can say delete note. Okay, so that's going to take care of a very simple note detail page, if you will, that we'll call view note. And so let's head into the component to kind of wire things up. Again, I'm going to remove the boilerplate, and we're going to inject a note service instance into our constructor of type note service. We'll go ahead and bring that in. And we're going to create a new method on the note service to handle that delete. But first, we're going to need to get a note. So let's go ahead and create a property note. And oops, and we need to bring in our note model as well. And we're going to say this.note is equal to this.navparams.getNote. And the way this is going to work, we'll see here in just a moment. We're actually going to pass a note to this view, and the way that we access that object is by calling navparams.get. And it's going to be a note object, so we are going to set the note object in this class to that object that we retrieve using note params. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this lifecycle hook, but we will have a delete note method, which will take this create date, and then we're going to pass it as we saw in our template, which is a number type. Because if you recall from the last video, when we create any new note, I just new up a new date, and that will be essentially the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970 UTC, so represented as a number. And so we'll invoke our note service here, and we'll write a new method on it called delete note, and we will find that once again using this create date as our unique identifier. After that's done, we can just simply use the nav control as we've seen previously to pop this view from the stack, because the nav controller is managing our routing as a stack. So we'll pop this view note page from the top of the stack, which should reveal the next view in the stack, which would be our home page. Okay, so let's head over into our note service and implement this delete note functionality. So we're going to head there with F12, and then under get all notes, we're going to create that delete note method, and it's going to take our create date, which is a number. And so let's think about this for a minute, because it's not immediately obvious how we're going to delete a single note, given the fact that when we're using storage here, we're basically updating a single key that contains an array of notes as its values. So the key in our local storage is notes, and we've got this note array as its value. So the way that we're going to delete a specific note, given its unique identifier, is not, of course, to delete the notes array, but rather to return that notes array as it is, except for the note that we want to delete. So let's do that. So we know we're going to set this.notes, and we're going to say this.notes is equal to itself, but then we're going to use filter, and we'll pass it a callback that will basically say return where the create date on a given note is not equal to the create date that we pass our method. And then once that's called, then we can once again set that in storage. So if we were to have many other methods here, then we might refactor, since we're using this line repeatedly here, where we're just setting this notes key to this.notes, but it's fine here as well. But again, notice what we're doing is we're not, in a sense, deleting, if you will, but rather we're using filter to return that notes array with all of its elements except for the one that contains the create date for the note that we want to remove. So I think this is kind of a nice example of using filter when we're working with an array of objects that we want to mutate in some way. Okay, so that's all good, but now how are we actually going to get to our view note page? Well, we're going to want to get a note from the home page so that we can display its data, all of its data, on this view note page. So I'm going to add one more method to our note service here, and we'll call that get note. And we're going to pass it a create date, which would be a number. Again, recall that this is our unique identifier for a given note. So here we're going to use this.storage again, and we're going to get. Obviously we need to get a note from our collection of notes, so we'll start with getting that collection using the key. And this is going to return a promise. So we'll write then, and then we'll write a callback function here so that when it resolves, we can do something with that promise. So what we're looking for is a single note. So what I'm going to do is create a private note property, which is of type note. And so we're getting that collection of notes from storage as a promise. And so when it resolves, we're going to set this.note equal to all of those notes we're getting back, or rather a copy of them that we can get using the spread operator again. And now we can use .find to find a note by its create date. So create date is equal to the create date that we pass this method. And then we'll return this .note. So similar to how we used filter previously to return a collection of notes, save for the note that we're deleting that we looked up, if you will, by its create date, when we use find, we can explicitly return a single instance of a note from an array by looking for a create date that matches on any one of those notes, and then simply returning it. So now we have a way for our service to return a note given its unique identifier to any other component that is requesting it. And where might we want to request it? Well, we want to request it on our home page where we have a list of notes. So we want to be able to click on a note, and when we click on it, we want to get taken to our view note page. And if you recall, our view note page that we were just working with has a way to receive a note object from some nav params. So let's wire this up now. So on our home page template, what I want to do is just add a simple click event binding. So click to some method called getNote. And of course we have the note, so we can just grab its create date. Okay, cool. So let's write this method in our component. So under add note, maybe we'll write a get note method. It takes a create date, which is of type number. And we'll invoke our note service and specifically use the new get note method that we just wrote. Pass it the create date that we're passing in from the template. And recall this is going to return us a promise. So then what we'll do is we'll simply say when that resolves, we set this .note because our promise will return that note object that it's finding from our array. And so we can go ahead and create a note property here. And I'm just going to explicitly make these private. Okay, so now when this promise resolves, we set our note. And now that we have the note, we can actually use our NavController again to do something pretty cool, which is to actually push the ViewNote page. So we'll bring that in. So that, of course, will bring up the ViewNote page, but the ViewNote page's constructor is expecting us, or has the ability to receive some object. So as a second parameter to push here, we can add any nav params that we want to pass along to the view. So we're going to pass this object, we're going to call it note, and we're going to set it equal to this .note. So what's neat about this is we're just passing some object to the view. We've got a note property on it. We set it equal to this note that we've retrieved from our service. And then back in our ViewNote component, in the constructor, we can see that we are going to immediately set this .note on this page to some nav params that we're passing this view, specifically the note from that object that we're passing. So this is kind of a neat way, I think, to pass data between pages in Ionic, simply using nav params and the NavController. So if we've wired this up correctly, we should be able to now see it if we start the server back up. Okay, so let's take a look. We'll go ahead and add a note. And now if we click it, we see that no component factory found for ViewNote page. Did you add it to ngModule.entry components? And no, we did not. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I forget to do this often as I've been working with Ionic because it's not something that we typically do if we're using just a plain Angular project using the Angular CLI. But take a look in app.module.ts and note that we have some entry components in an array here. And we need to add any pages that Ionic is going to need to render into these entry components, which will include all the pages for our application. So let's go ahead and include that here. So ViewNote page, go ahead and make sure it's imported. Likewise, we'll add it to our declarations. So at least at the time of this recording, the Ionic CLI is not adding ViewNote, or it's not adding new pages that we generate to our declarations or entry components array. Okay, so let's see if that has solved our issue. I'm going to go ahead and stop the server and restart. Okay, notice that when you restart, you should still see what's in your local storage unless there's something kind of wonky going on with your local storage. In any case, now when we click on our note, we get taken to this page. And so that's pretty cool. We also have our delete note button. So if we delete it, let's see if this is working. It appears to be working because our note no longer exists. So let's add a couple of test notes here. And we should be able to click on a note. And yeah, we can see it. That's pretty cool. We can click on another note and we can see some different data. So let's see what happens when we delete a note. And we can see that the new note that we had just created disappears.